It was one of those mornings when the sky seemed to know something the rest of us didn't. Thick, slate-gray clouds hung low above the Arizona courthouse like they were eavesdropping, bracing for the storm that wasn't in the forecast, but in the courtroom. A row of news vans choked the curb outside, their satellite dishes stretching toward the sky like antennas desperate to pick up the signal of unfolding scandal. Behind the lenses, reporters whispered with hushed urgency, carefully crafting their teases for audiences glued to their phones and flat screens. This wasn't a typical day. This was a reckoning, 1 year in the making, and the whole country was watching. Some were there for the drama, others for justice. Many simply couldn't look away from the slow-motion train wreck that had unraveled over more than a decade on national television. The Brown family, once the face of unconventional unity, was now a fractured mirror reflecting betrayal, broken promises, and bitter endings. What had started as a show about love and faith had slowly turned into a living exhibit of emotional endurance. This was more than a property dispute. This was personal. This was about power, trust, respect, and the Coyote Pass land that had become a symbol of everything that went wrong. Inside, the atmosphere was suffocating, thick with tension, silence, and unspoken grief. The creak of courtroom doors opening was louder than expected, echoing like thunder in a chapel. Security directed reporters and a few select spectators to their assigned seats, but everyone knew where they really wanted to look, at the woman who walked in without flinching. Janelle Brown. Calm, composed, back straight like she had nothing left to prove. She wore a navy blazer and crisp white shirt underneath, minimal, powerful, intentional. She didn't scan the room. The flashing cameras weren't her focus. She wasn't here for attention. She was here for resolution. Right beside her sat Mary Brown, still, quiet, a figure carved out of restraint. Her red hair, as always, meticulously done. Her hands rested in her lap like they were holding something heavy, something invisible. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. Her face unreadable, but her presence thunderous. And then came Cody Brown. No entourage, no confident strut, just a man walking in alone, carrying the weight of years of decisions that had finally caught up to him. His once fluffy curls now thinning, grayer, his face worn in ways makeup couldn't hide. The swagger that once charmed 3 women into spiritual marriages was gone, replaced by something hollow. He looked less like a man going to court and more like one walking into confession. Trailing behind him, almost quietly, was Robin Brown, the last wife standing, but even she looked unsteady. Her lips were tight. Her eyes flicked from Janelle to Mary, back to Kody. Gone was the calm poise fans had come to associate with her. In its place, anxiety, vulnerability, maybe even fear. This wasn't just a courtroom. This was ground zero for everything that had unraveled. Faith, family, finances, and the future. And at the heart of it all, Coyote Pass. 14 acres of dry Arizona land, untouched, undeveloped, but soaked in emotional investment. It was supposed to be a haven, a legacy. Instead, it had become a battlefield. The bailiff called the room to order. Judge Loretta Thompson, known for her no-nonsense style and a stare that could slice through steel, took her seat. The murmur died instantly. The room didn't just go quiet. It went still. Even the air felt like it was holding its breath. Outside, the cameras kept rolling. Inside, time seemed to pause. No one moved, no one spoke. Because everyone, every single person in that courtroom knew the truth. This wasn't just a legal fight over land. This was the emotional climax of a collapsing empire, the final chapter of a family that had been built on shared dreams and now stood divided by silence. And today, for better or worse, that chapter would finally be read aloud. When Janelle Brown stood to testify, the courtroom didn't just quiet, it listened. Not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. Curiosity, respect, maybe guilt, maybe even a shared sense of finally. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't cry, she didn't need to. Her presence alone delivered what her words would only confirm. She had carried more than her fair share. For years. Her voice, even. Her gaze, fixed. Her tone was calm, but every word hit like a pinprick to the skin. Slow, steady, unapologetically precise. the kind of delivery you only get from someone who has already lived through the worst part and survived it. She spoke not just for herself, but for every woman who's ever been told, "Just trust me." For every partner who's ever invested time, energy, and money into a dream they didn't have their name on. For every mother who picked up the slack and held things together while someone else took the credit. She recalled the early years, moving from Wyoming to Las Vegas to Flagstaff, not for a job or ambition of her own, but to follow Cody's vision, his plan, his shifting map of what a plural family was supposed to look like. But each new relocation chipped away at her stability, financially, emotionally, spiritually. She described how she'd poured thousands into family investments, loans, down payments, repairs. But her name? Never on the deed, not once. She didn't push back then. Why? Because at the time, it was just easier this way. That phrase echoed in the room like a warning. Just easier this way. She spoke about how, while Cody's name was protected, hers was erased. How her trust in the family structure led her to make financial decisions that left her exposed. She shared how she skipped personal savings for the sake of the group. How she watched Robin's name rise in importance while hers faded behind the curtain. How even when she had questions, she was told to have faith, to wait, to be patient. It wasn't just about money, it was about value, worth, legacy. And you didn't need to have a law degree to understand what she meant when she said, "I never signed up to be expendable. I joined to build something, a life, a legacy. Instead, I was systematically erased." Fans who'd followed Sister Wives from the beginning remembered Janelle as the quiet workhorse. She was the one working full-time jobs, balancing bills, pushing for financial planning while others leaned on spiritual callings and shared emotion. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't loud. But she was always the one doing the math, literally and figuratively. Clips flashed through the minds of anyone familiar with the show. Janelle in the RV trying to make it work on the land no one else wanted to touch. Janelle confronting Kody about her financial independence, calmly telling him, "I'm not going to be homeless." Janelle sitting in confessional after confessional, stating that she didn't feel heard, didn't feel prioritized, and still, she stayed. For the kids, for the idea of family. On Instagram, fans had watched her try to build something out of nothing, starting her own wellness journey, launching side hustles, showing up for her children when things got hard. Even after the cameras stopped rolling, she was showing grit. And in that courtroom, all of that came to a head. Janelle didn't beg. She didn't even ask for sympathy. She simply laid out the receipts, financial and emotional. She reminded the court, and Kody, that she had made choices in good faith. That she had trusted in a system designed to keep her in the dark, that she had kept showing up long after the love stopped being mutual. And that, maybe, was the most cutting part. Because what Janelle proved in that moment wasn't just that she'd been wronged. She proved that she had been the backbone of the family's foundation, and she had done it without a title, without a deed, and without recognition. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her silence between sentences said more than anything else could. The power in restraint. The weight in composure. Her testimony wasn't a performance, it was a reckoning. And as she stepped down, something shifted in the room. Even the reporters stopped typing for a moment. Even the cameras, with all their cold lenses and blinking lights, seemed to soften. Because this wasn't just reality TV anymore. This was real life. When Mary Brown stood to take the witness stand, the room shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. Something about Mary has always been harder to read. Controlled, guarded, but you could feel it in the courtroom air, the slow churn of heartbreak finally surfacing. If Janelle's testimony had been measured and meticulous, Mary's was something different, something heavier. It wasn't just about finances. It was about identity, about being forgotten inside a family she helped build from the ground up. She was Cody's first wife, the original, the foundation, the blueprint. Back when it was just the two of them in 1990, before cameras, before Coyote Pass, before the word sister wife became a household phrase, Mary believed in the dream, in him, in the possibility of a big, united plural family. She sacrificed her one-on-one marriage to step into a spiritual dynamic that promised community, love, and eternal togetherness. She didn't walk into polygamy for fame or attention. She walked in for faith. And what did she get in return? Slow erasure. Mary spoke softly at first, her voice barely rising above a whisper, but her words pierced like glass. She painted a vivid picture of being the one who supported Kody through his earliest ambitions, who welcomed Janelle and Christine with open arms even when it hurt, who stayed through the awkward, painful transitions from wife to just someone in the house. She recalled the countless moments she swallowed her pride, bit her tongue, and smiled through invisible bruises. But the truth? The unraveling didn't happen overnight. Mary admitted her own flaws. And yes, she talked about that scandal, the emotional affair that played out across tabloids and social media, the catfish incident, the moment that, for many viewers, became a turning point. She didn't make excuses. She owned it. She told the court and the world that she was lonely, isolated, that her search for connection came from years of being emotionally dismissed by the one man she was still legally married to. That's when her voice shifted. She described how, even after the incident, she tried to make things right, tried to rebuild trust. She clung to every breadcrumb of validation Kody offered. "You'll always have a place in this family," he once told her when they signed the papers for Coyote Pass. Mary believed him because she wanted to, needed to, but the land told a different story. Within months, her name was quietly removed from the property records. No explanation, no heads up, just gone. Like she had never been a stakeholder, never been a partner, never been anything more than a placeholder in the family's history. And then came the words that hit like thunder in a room full of whispering ghosts. "I was a footnote." One sentence, 4 words, and somehow it said everything. Viewers who had watched Sister Wives from the beginning knew the truth. Mary was never the dramatic one. She didn't stir the pot. She faded into the background, slowly, painfully. And the worst part? She knew it was happening. She saw herself becoming invisible and still tried to stay relevant in a family that no longer saw her. Online, the reaction was instant. Fans flooded forums, comment sections, Reddit threads. Sympathy for Mary poured in from everywhere. People who had once dismissed her as bitter or distant now saw her as what she always was: loyal, heartbroken, and quietly crushed beneath the weight of decades of emotional rejection. People remembered the way Kody shut her down in confessionals, the cold shoulder, the clipped conversations, the way Robin stepped in and gradually took all the emotional bandwidth Kody had left. Mary never fought for the spotlight. She just wanted a seat at the table she helped build. But by the time she looked up, the chairs were already filled, and hers had been taken away without even a goodbye. As Mary stepped down from the stand, the courtroom didn't clap, but they didn't need to. The silence that followed her testimony was louder than applause. Reporters typed faster, eyes wide, some wiped tears they weren't expecting. Even Robin, nervous in the back row, looked down, her lips tight, her fingers twisted together. Because no matter where you stood on the Brown family saga, there was no denying the truth anymore. Mary Brown had been erased, and today, she finally got to write herself back into the story. When Cody Brown finally walked to the witness stand, he didn't carry the same posture he once did. There was no flash of charisma, no puffed chest, no rehearsed grin for the cameras. The once commanding father figure who had led a family of 4 wives and 18 children now looked like a man unraveling under the weight of his own choices. His once golden curls, now thinning and graying, drooped at the sides of his face. The fire in his step, gone. And when he opened his mouth to speak, even his voice betrayed him. He paused, then tried to speak again, choking on his own uncertainty. And just like that, the Kody we knew from Sister Wives, the confident, often defensive, occasionally dismissive head of the Brown family, began to fall apart in front of everyone. "I don't know when I lost control," he said. It was supposed to be a moment of reflection, but it landed with a dull thud, because no one in that courtroom, not Mary, not Janelle, not even Robin, needed to hear when it happened. They already knew. They'd lived through it. What followed was less a testimony and more a tangled web of justifications. He said he made difficult choices to keep the family together, that he was emotionally exhausted, financially overburdened, spiritually confused, that the titles, the shifting of deeds, the separation of responsibilities, none of it was meant to hurt anyone. It was just logistics, tax purposes, the best decision at the time. But for everyone listening, it was more of the same. Kody wasn't giving clarity. He was giving a half-confession buried under decades of deflection. He admitted that he leaned too hard on Robin, that she supported him in ways the others didn't, that she understood him better, that maybe, just maybe, he put too much into that one relationship while letting the others starve for attention. But even that didn't sound like an apology. It sounded like a man trying to explain why the house burned down after lighting all the matches himself. "I never meant to hurt them," he said. But Janelle and Mary didn't flinch, because hurt isn't always about intent. It's about consequence. Social media was brutal. Fans watching the live stream clips and courtroom leaks weren't having it. One fan wrote, "Cody's crocodile tears don't move me anymore." Another added, "It's the gaslighting for me. He still thinks he's the victim." Hashtags like "Not Cody Collapse" and "Justice for Janelle" trended for hours. Memes showed up within minutes. Him crying under captions like, "When your wives finally hit the unsubscribe button." But this wasn't just the internet being mean. This was built-up backlash. Years of viewers watching Kody dismiss Mary on national television, watching him clash with Christine, watching him brush off Janelle's concerns like they were inconveniences instead of legitimate grievances. He spent over a decade portraying himself as the glue holding the family together, when in truth, he was the force pulling it apart. Even now, on the stand, with everything exposed, Kody couldn't bring himself to say it plainly. "Yes, I was wrong." Instead, he said things like, "I tried, and I was overwhelmed, and I just wanted peace." But peace never came, because peace, real peace, requires accountability, not strategy. He looked at Janelle. "I thought you'd always understand," he said. She didn't even blink. He glanced at Mary. "I never wanted to lose your trust." She didn't turn her head. And somewhere in the gallery, Robin sat frozen, silent, lips pressed tight, eyes darting between the women who had once been her family and the man who chose her above all. In that moment, Kody was no longer a patriarch. He was a man sitting in the wreckage of his own design, trying to convince everyone it wasn't really his fault. And no one was buying it anymore. When Judge Loretta Thompson returned to the bench, the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Not a cough, not a shuffle, not even a whisper disturbed the heavy silence. It was the kind of stillness that only comes before something irreversible. After hours of testimony, decades of sacrifice, and years of unspoken betrayal finally aired out like dirty laundry on national TV, this was the moment. And you could tell by the look in her eyes, Judge Thompson wasn't here to sugarcoat anything. She began slowly, her voice calm, deliberate, but with the edge of someone who had heard enough. "It is evident," she said, "from examining the financial documents, text exchanges, and property records, that Mrs. Mary Brown and Mrs. Janelle Brown have substantial moral and legal claims to the properties under dispute." And just like that, jaws dropped. The crowd didn't cheer, but it didn't have to. The wave of vindication rippled through the gallery like a silent, powerful gust. You could feel it in your chest. Then came the final hammer. The transfer of complete ownership of the contested Flagstaff property to Janelle Brown is hereby mandated. Mary Brown will receive a complete deed to the adjacent land tract. Mr. Brown will no longer be able to claim either property by the end of the week. The documents must be signed and filed. Boom. The gavel struck. Headlines wrote themselves. Outside, reporters scrambled to push breaking alerts to every outlet. Cody Brown loses Coyote Pass control. Sister wives verdict, Mary and Janelle win big. Social media exploded again, this time with celebratory posts, memes of Cody's stunned face, and a wave of comments cheering the poetic justice of it all. But inside that courtroom, Mary and Janelle didn't smile. They didn't smirk. They didn't gloat. Because for them, this wasn't about revenge. It was about closure. Janelle stood up first. Her back still straight, her chin high. She didn't look at Kody, not even once. Mary followed, her hands folded calmly in front of her, her expression unreadable, but her presence unmistakably strong. Together, the two women walked out hand in hand, not as wives, not as rivals, not as footnotes, but as women who finally reclaimed what had been denied them for far too long. The silence between them said everything. They didn't need to shout. Their presence said it all. We endured, and now we're done surviving. We're owning. And behind them trailed Cody Brown, slower, smaller. his shoulders hunched, his face pale, and his once sure footing now hesitant and uncertain. Robin stood to meet him, her eyes rimmed red, her mouth tight with 1,000 words she didn't say. There was no touch, no comfort, just distance. Then, in the softest voice, so low it almost disappeared into the hallway noise, Kody said, "I apologize. For everything. For assuming you two were just always going to be there. For not remembering what we built." Janelle turned halfway. She didn't smile. She didn't tear up. She just looked at him like someone who'd finally seen the truth. "Kody," she said coolly, "you didn't forget. You made a different choice." Mary didn't even turn around. She just said, flatly, "We're not angry anymore, but you don't need to apologize to us." And then they walked away. Not as broken wives, not as exes desperate for validation, but as two women who had survived a family, a marriage, a spotlight, and a collapse, and came out on the other side with their heads high and the title deed in hand. As for Kody, he stayed behind, alone in the hallway, surrounded by whispers, by questions, by cameras and headlines, and a legacy slowly slipping through his fingers. Judgment Day, the media called it. But for Mary and Janelle, it was freedom. After the gavel fell and the courtroom emptied, the headlines came fast. But the healing? That's another story. The judgment might have closed a legal chapter, but the emotional story of the Brown family is still very much unwinding. This wasn't just about who gets what land. It was about years of unresolved pain finally being acknowledged, about voices that had been silenced or ignored finally being heard, about women who had given everything being told, officially, legally, and publicly, that they mattered. And yet, this moment didn't happen in a vacuum. It came on the heels of years of emotional exhaustion and life-altering events. Christine Brown, once wife number 3, had already drawn her line in the sand. She walked away in 2021, the first step off the sinking ship. Her exit wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. Christine leaving the family was the first domino to fall, exposing cracks that had been carefully papered over for years. She sold her share of the land back to the family for just $10, not out of spite, but to sever the last tie to a chapter she'd already buried. Then came the heartbreak no family should ever endure. Janelle's son, Garrison Brown, passed away in early 2024. The news shattered hearts across the fan base, and for Janelle, it was a pain no court decision, no piece of land, no legal win could erase. Garrison was one of the bright lights of the Brown kids, funny, grounded, thoughtful. His loss was a seismic shift in her world, and while the courtroom victory brought justice, it also stood in contrast to the deep, private grief that no one but a mother can fully carry. In that light, the redivision of Coyote Pass land in March 2024 felt like more than a legal shuffle. It was an attempt, finally, to make things right on paper. After years of imbalance, it was confirmed. Janelle and Mary each received 25% of the land. Kody and Robin retained the remaining 50%. That's a major pivot from how things had stood before, when Mary and Janelle were essentially on the outside looking in, invested emotionally and financially, but with little to show for it legally. Property records don't lie. And now, for the first time in years, they finally reflected something that looked like fairness. Still, many fans were asking, why did it take this long? Why did it take courtrooms, media pressure, and public fallout for Kody to let go of the control he held so tightly, especially when that control never seemed to stretch across all his relationships equally? People haven't forgotten how Kody managed his finances, or more accurately, how he prioritized them. While his ex-wives were left picking up the pieces, building businesses from scratch, moving states, starting over, Kody was writing checks, not to them, not for their kids, but to political candidates. Public records show he donated over $6,400 across several years to Republican campaigns and organizations like the U.S. Concealed Carry Association. He gave money to Trump's committee, to Vivek Ramaswamy, to gun advocacy groups, and sure, he has the right to support whoever he wants, but fans couldn't help but ask the obvious question. Why was there money for campaigns and causes, but not for the women who held up his life for decades? On social media, the tone was biting. Your wives funded your dreams. Now you're funding political dreams? One commenter wrote. Another said, Janelle lived in an RV while Kody wrote checks to people who don't even know his name. And maybe that's the legacy Kody didn't anticipate. Because it's not just the failed marriages or the courtroom loss, it's the long, slow erosion of trust, of credibility, of the myth he once represented. The man holding a big, beautiful, complicated family together. Now the reality has landed. Hard. Christine's gone, happy and thriving. Janelle's rebuilding, still mourning but standing tall. Mary, once the most invisible, now has land in her name and strength in her silence. And Kody? He's left with Robin, a half share of Coyote Pass, and a story that no longer casts him as the noble leader. But here's the twist. This isn't just a tabloid scandal. It's about justice, finally showing up late but loud. It's about women reclaiming their worth in a system that often told them to wait, to forgive, to keep the peace at the cost of their power. It's about legacy. Not just what you leave behind, but who you leave behind.